Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, or if it's your first time, welcome to the channel here on Mansa XP. And what we do on the channel is we kind of go through different topics going on in gaming, different subjects, things going on the internet, current events. We do reviews also as well, pickups, things like that. But for today's video, I wanted to kind of talk about this topic that, a lot of people have been debating about, especially as of, recent times with the new generation and things going on with Nintendo and their new system and things like that. And what that topic is kind of talking about how do you kind of gauge what price is right for a game. So obviously it comes down to the individual, what you think is, makes sense for you and everything. But I want to kind of talk about what kind of factors into the prices of games, what goes into it, what would kind of determine what you think is worth a game. Because, a lot of people kind of talk about, oh, this game isn't worth X amount of money, but it's like, no, to you, it's not worth that amount of money. Or like the reasonings for it they give isn't very solid, which, happens on the internet all the time. Everybody has an opinion. So we're going to go through all those things today. Definitely leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are someone new, and let's get into it right after this. So I had a little bit of trouble kind of coming up with a title for this video, but basically what we're going to talk about is frame rate, resolution, features in games, remakes versus, the original release, what kind of goes into, what people think, 2D versus 3D, basically what people want to, the factors people kind of think about when they decide what they want to pay for a game. So the first part we want to talk about is frame rate and resolution, which is a hot topic in today's gaming era, where we're talking about essentially like the jump between games and graphics. It's not as large as it used to be, right? And that's always going to happen with technology. So obviously, going from the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, going to the PS1 and Nintendo 64, and, then going to the GameCube and the Xbox and the PS2, then the 360 and everything like that. Obviously, you could see a giant graphical leap every generation, but at the same time, that giant leap kind of gets smaller and smaller. So when we talk about features in games and frame rate and things like that, that kind of becomes the new thing, right? Because you want your video games to kind of still look like video games. I know everyone wants, the wrinkles on the face and the sweat and all this kind of stuff and photorealism. Like that works for certain games, but like me personally, I want my video games to look like video games. I don't want my game to look like a CGI movie and, a Marvel movie or something like that, where like it looks like real life. There has to be some gaminess to it, if that makes sense. So with that being said, you kind of have to come up with either innovation in the design, gameplay innovation, things like that, are just, better quality as far as, resolution, frame rate, things like that. So when we talk about frame rate, and to be honest, I kind of learned more about frame rate when it came to doing this, YouTube, as opposed to just gaming. But the actual definition of frame rate, if you Google it real quick, like a simple definition is how many frames or still images are on the screen per second. So you see 30 FPS, 60 FPS, you see 120 FPS, things like that. It means, like, to put it simply, it's kind of how smooth is it as you're playing, right? Like it's not choppy, you could see everything nice and smooth movements, things like that. And the reason it's a hot topic is because certain games it matters for, certain games it doesn't really matter for. Like 60 frames per second is obviously, the ideal choice, right? Like everyone wants 60 frames, that is kind of the standard. But when you ask the, casual consumer, most of them probably wouldn't notice. So like this was a hot topic most recently with, let's say, Redfall, right? So Redfall, amongst other things that was going wrong with it, ended up being 30 frames per second. And now some people may not notice that, but when it comes to first of all, this is Microsoft's, big arcane exclusive first $70 game, and it's a shooter, right? Like when you're playing a game like a shooter, a fighter, a platformer, things like that, you want to have the highest frame rate possible. Now, I think on PC it was 60 frames, but on console for some reason they couldn't get it to 60 yet. So you're playing at 30 frames per second, which isn't ideal. Now, obviously, again, it all comes down to the individual, but ideally, especially if you're spending $70 on a game, or a game, you know, the budget was so much and you spent $500 on a console or $1,000 on a PC, you want that great frame rate, right? And then that goes into also resolution. Now, a lot of people may not notice, you know, you always hear the term 4K and 1080 or 1440p, and what that basically is, you know, based on the Google definition, is pretty much how many pixels are on the screen at a time. So 4K is 3840 by 2160, and then 1080 is 1920 by 1080, meaning, you know, horizontal and vertical. Now, it basically, you know, deals with like the sharpness of the image. Now, 4K to 1080, you can definitely tell there's a difference, but for me personally, like, it has to be side by side for me to notice. Like, if you showed me a video right now, I would not be able to tell if it was 4K or not. Now, why this kind of matters less when it comes to gaming is because, like, yeah, we care about, you know, how good a picture looks and everything, but at the end of the day, you're playing a video game. You're doing a lot of movements. You're not really, you know, unless you're sitting down and not moving a lot and just taking in the environment, or maybe the environment's not that crazy, you don't really care about that. Like, you rather them focus more on, you know, steady frame rate, which is another thing people don't think about, and, you know, just not a lot of pop-in and just a lot of polish and things like that. You're not really worrying about that. Now, obviously, the ideal way to play a game is 4K 60, but that takes a lot of horsepower, for lack of better terms. That takes a lot of, you know, development costs. That takes a lot for, you know, these systems to run. Now, on a PC, you can run 4K 120 frames per second on some like super intensive games, but building a PC, like a good one, minimum is going to cost you like, you know, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000. So most people aren't willing to pay that. And, you know, I just think it's unrealistic to think that every game is going to be 4K 60. Now, I know with this generation, a lot of people think it should have got pushed back, COVID. Like, this is a weird generation, and there's just a lot of reasons why 4K 60 for every game just isn't possible. Now, what's being dubbed, you know, the game of the generation, Starfield, that's coming out in a couple weeks, people are waiting to see, like, hey, is it going to be 30 frames or 60 frames? And we learned that it's going to be 30 frames per second. And, you know, Todd Howard kind of said, you know, ahead of time, like, hey, listen, we're willing to sacrifice, you know, frame rate for our fidelity just to have a better world. Like, what are you getting from this game? Everyone's like, oh no, it's not 60 frames per second. It's like, okay, is that going to make you not buy the game? Like, to me, not buying a game because it's not 60 frames per second does not make sense. Now, like, if it doesn't run well, then yeah, sure, you're going to, you know, talk with your wallet and not pay. But if you're getting all these features, an expansive storyline, you know, just the choice and consequence, you know, just every Bethesda game is highly regarded, like, why would it being 60 frames alone, that'd be the one reason you not get it? And a lot of people don't think about it too. Like, a steady frame rate is better than a higher frame rate. You know, people talk about, like, let's talk about Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom ended up being $70, but it's like, and it was only 30 frames per second. But look at how expansive that game is. Look how, you know, polished, and for the most part, there were a little bit of dips, but it's like 30 frames steady looks a lot better than, yeah, 60, then it drops to 40, then it goes up to 50. Like, you'll notice that change a lot more than whether it's 60 or 30, and a lot of people don't take that into consideration. Speaking of Tears of the Kingdom, that goes into my next point, which is kind of the pricing on these games. So we know Sony came out the gate with the new generation having their games at $70, right? So there's such thing as an industry standard, right, in everything, not just video games, everything. Kind of, you price around what everybody's asking for. If Sony priced their games at $100 and then Nintendo and, you know, Xbox are having it at $60 or $70, and, you know, PlayStation are just going to price themselves out. Of course, there will be some people that spend $100, but a lot of people, the casual consumer who can, you know, is your major, you know, consumer, they're not going to buy that. Their parents are going to say, oh, let's get the cheaper option. You know, that's why Nintendo's games, for the most part, were a lot cheaper than everybody else's. Wii games were 50, while PS3 and Xbox 360 games were $60. Same thing with the Switch. All the games were 60. They had the exception with Tears of the Kingdom, but Xbox Series and PlayStation 5 have moved on to $70 now. The thing is, the debate comes into like, what game is worth it, right? And like I said, it comes down to features. People are willing to pay $70 for Tears of the Kingdom because not only is Breath of the Wild considered one of the best games of all time, if not the best, this was the sequel to that game. Plus, like, The Legend of Zelda already has a strong name and brand around it. And then you add in all these new features, all the like genre, like industry defining new features for a video game that we've never seen in a video game. Not the way it interacts with the environment, none of that. We've never seen anything like that. And the game was so big, they put it on a new special, cart. So them charging $70, honestly, people would pay $100 for that game. I would too. Now, the big argument comes into with this whole like 2D versus 3D games, right? Like, there's this whole debate that, oh no, 2D games are now worth $60, or 3D games have to be $60 or $70. Like, it's this weird dynamic. Like, I get it, because now gaming is considered the standard as 3D, right? Since the PS1 era, 3D is the way we play games. But there are a lot of great 2D games, especially on the Nintendo Switch, or a lot of these, indie developers and things like that, where the games are $60. Again, it depends. With Sonic Superstars coming out, Super Mario Wonder, these games are established franchises. So them charging $60 to me isn't that crazy. Like, or we got Prince of Persia, Metroid Dread, these games coming out and people are like, oh, that's not worth that much. It's like, how can you say that for a fact? Now, as far as the companies charging a certain amount, and like you could look at a game and be like, okay, like, no, like the game's 5 hours long. It doesn't do anything that interesting. The reviews aren't that great. Like, stuff like that. I understand. You could say, hey, this isn't worth it to me. But again, everything's based on an industry standard. If everyone's charging a certain amount for a certain game, that's what you're going to play. But to be honest, I'd rather play a nice 10 to 15 hour great 2D game that's, looks good, gameplay's great, has a, decent story, if there is one at all, then play these like super bloated, open world, million fetch quests, 8,000 markers all over the map, things to do, like bloated DLC, microtransactions. All these games, they're charging $70 for. Like, you want to go to a recent release from the end of last year, Callisto Protocol. That game had a giant budget, so of course they're going to charge $70, but the game wasn't good to a lot of people. It looked good visually, but there was a lot of, sometimes graphical errors. The story wasn't that good. Gameplay wasn't all that. So it's like, we're okay when we see the big, shiny thing and just saying like, oh, yep, $70, sure, no problem. But then when a game's actually good, which is the most important part of a game, we're like, oh, it's 2D? No, it's like, I don't know, man. It's weird. So then that comes to my point about, remakes, right? Metroid Prime Remaster. A lot of people, that's one of the highest rated games of all time. The original is. And it has like, I think the remake has like 94. And it wasn't a real remake. It was just a, little quality of life additions, better graphics and colors and things like that. But to everybody's surprise, Nintendo being Nintendo, they actually didn't charge too much for it. They charged it for $40, and that was kind of crazy because a lot of people look at Skyward Sword HD. It didn't change a ton of stuff, and they charged $60 for it. But again, Zelda's going to sell. A lot of people do not have a Wii anymore. They can't access that game. They're going to pay the $60, but Zelda has that cachet, so they're able to do that. Resident Evil 4 remake, I think, was $70. Dead Space remake, $70. And those games actually changed a lot of mechanics along with the graphical, changes and the story changes and things like that. So people were willing to pay that. So like at the end of the day, the company's going to charge what they're going to charge for a game, but game having, some cachet like a Mario, a Zelda, things like that, even if there's no online play and all this other stuff, it's like, hey, it's got the cachet. It's gonna sell. You know, people look at Pokemon. To me, yeah, sure, with the cachet and all that, and the amount of Pokemon and DLC and all this stuff, technically Pokemon is a $60 game. But when you look at how the game looks, like for everyone that care about graphics so much, y'all keep buying these $60 Pokemon games that don't look good, don't run well, and we just keep buying them. You know, I hadn't played Pokemon in over 8 years. I decided to buy Violet to try it out on Switch, and I haven't picked it up since I think last December. Like, it's just it wasn't doing it for me. You know, some of that is me getting a little older, but like, I don't know. It's just very inconsistent across the board with what we actually care about, what we're going to pay for, what we're not going to pay for. I don't know. It to me is, I don't know, bro. Like, people need to think more before they speak. Think about it, and then, you know, make your decision from there. In closing, listen, at the end of the day, it is up to you what you're going to spend your money on. I've had multiple videos talking about, you know, digital versus physical, how to not build a backlog, things like that. And in those videos, there's tips to just talk about, like, how to avoid these type of situations. Because when you talk about pricing of games, at the end of the day, listen, there's sales all the time. You don't need to buy games day one. If you don't want to play a game, you don't have to. Like, complaining about how a game is and what you're going to spend your money on it, just, you got to make a decision. Like, don't give in to FOMO and just say, I got to buy every game at $60 a day it comes out. Every game goes on sale, sometimes ahead of time. I got Tears of the Kingdom for $52, and that included shipping because I like pre-ordered from this store in Canada or whatever, and I got it a couple days late, but I got a $70 game for basically $50. Like, you just gotta wait. There's eShop sales, there's all these kind of things, and then if the game's not, you know, up to your standard, then don't pay it. But like, for some people, we like different things in our games, and that decides what we're gonna pay for. So that's pretty much all I have to say on the matter. You guys let me know in the comment section below, you know, what are the things you kind of look at to determine how much you're going to spend on a game? Like, is every game worth just $60, $70 just off the rip? Is it based on the cachet of the franchise? Is it features? Is it online play? What is it? Y'all let me know in the comment section below. Again, leave a like on this video if you haven't, subscribe if you have not already, and I'll catch you on the next video.